Well, welcome back for our sixth and final session in our symposium on the Dunhuang Caves. Everybody ready to start this afternoon? Yes, okay, great. My name is Robert Buswell. I'm the director of UCLA's Center for Buddhist Studies, and on behalf of all of our faculty and graduate students in Buddhist Studies here, I'm very proud to have been one of the co-sponsors for this quite important symposium. It's actually rather inspiring to see how much the field of Dunhuang studies has developed over the last generation. Years ago, when I was first in graduate school at Berkeley in 1981, I had the privilege of taking a seminar that was actually... May not be on. Okay, it's on. Okay, all right. I think my voice is just a bit bad today, so is that better now? Okay. Anyway, I was saying we've seen a lot of growth in the field of Dunhuang studies over the past generation. And when I was first in graduate school at Berkeley in around 1981 or so, I was privileged to be able to take a seminar that actually was specifically on Dunhuang studies that was delivered by the redoubtable Professor Michel Strickmann, who I'm sure many of you here in the audience have heard of. This, I'm sure, was the very first seminar to ever been taught in American academe specifically on Dunhuang. I remember the syllabus for the course was about a 150-page copiously annotated bibliography that Michel had made up that was, at that time, almost predominantly Japanese sources. There was a smattering of materials that were in French or German, a little bit in English, almost nothing in Chinese back in those days. But there have been so many requests from colleagues around the world for copies of that syllabus over the years that I'm sure 100 copies of this must be in circulation by now. I think his championing of Dunhuang materials actually helped to open an important subfield of Chinese Buddhist studies, which to me was a very important field personally, the field of Chinese Buddhist apocryphal materials or indigenous scriptures written in China on the model of imported Indian scripture. Many of the students who took that seminar with Michel at the time, myself included, ended up writing on Buddhist apocryphal texts from Dunhuang as part of our dissertation research. And I remember even years ago when the British Library was digitizing its Stein collection of Dunhuang materials, I think I actually paid money to help digitize the manuscripts of the Vajrasamadhi Sutra, which was the subject of my own dissertation. So I've done my own small part to put down some funds to help build the field as well. So, and I think also, if you look at the field of Chan studies, I think Dunhuang materials have completely revamped our understanding of the incipiency of the Chan school, the Zen school in China, and it helped us to completely rewrite the field of early Chan history over the course of the last generation. So I'm sure if you were to compile a similar bibliography of Dunhuang studies today, like that Michel Strickmann compiled 35 years ago, I'm sure there would now be thousands of entries in both English and in Chinese, areas where there was really nothing done previously to this. I think the sheer geographical and disciplinary breadth we see in the scholars who are here with us today and yesterday over the 2 days of this symposium. Okay. I'm pressing buttons by mistake, pardon me. In any case, I think this all helps to demonstrate the range and breadth of Dunhuang studies in the contemporary scholarly world. This last panel of our symposium today builds on some of the earlier presentations to examine religion and ritual at Mogao. I think to save time for the question and answer stage, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our three speakers right now and let them just come up sequentially and do their presentations. We'll then open it up for a joint questions and answer at the end. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Petra Rösch, who's Deputy Director and Curator of Buddhist Art at the Museum of East Asian Art in Cologne, Germany. Her research areas include the material culture of Chinese Buddhist confession rituals, the history of the collection of Buddhist scriptures, and the reception history of copies of materials. Her paper today is focusing on rituals of confession and repentance connected to various groups of Buddhas, either the 1,000 Buddhas, which is a very common grouping, or smaller groups such as 53 or 55 Buddhas as well. These materials are preserved in both texts written on paper or on stone, as well as in visual forms that are on the walls of the cave temples or on steles around the region. Our second speaker is going to be Professor Shen, who's assistant professor and holder of the Erkrantz Chair in World Arts at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU, New York University. Professor Shen researches and teaches the art and material culture of pre-modern China, with special attention paid to the circulation of ideas and images across borders. Her paper today focuses on the curious phenomenon of Tang Dynasty scrolls that contain nothing but repeated stamped impressions of Buddha images. She covers in her paper some of the past theories about the production of these artifacts and explores different questions concerning the forms and contents of these scrolls. And our third and final speaker is our very own Natasha Heller, Associate Professor of Buddhist Studies and Chinese Religions in the Asian Languages and Cultures Department here at UCLA. Her research examines the relationship between religious belief and cultural practices, primarily focusing on Buddhism during the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties. Her paper today examines the role of children in the visual culture of Dunhuang, and it focuses especially on copies of children's literature found at the site, such as the 1,000-character classics and Book of Family Names. So now that we've dispensed with the formalities, I can retire, bring up our first speaker, Dr. Petra Rösch, please.
Yes, backwards. Hello, everybody. Now you've seen all my presentation backwards already. I think we can stop and can go to the next speaker. So, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I hope you had a relaxing lunch break. Before starting, I would love to thank the organizers of this organization, of this conference and wonderful exhibition that they invited me for this wonderful conference, and I'm happy to be here. So, as I was introduced, I will speak about confession rituals, and let me just get right with this PowerPoint presentation. So I give a short introduction and then come to my images and my points. Ritual texts of confession and repentance, called Chanhui, are known in China already from the 3rd century onward. Buddhist sutras have been transmitted, which do contain purifications of transgressions, differing from the so far in monasteries known 2-weekly uposatha ceremony, which had been practiced there. These new texts expound on rituals in which transgressions are confessed and repented. They do this according to standardized texts, lists of transgressions, in front of small or large groups of Buddhas. They took place not like the uposatha ceremony vis-à-vis an abbot of a monastery, but in front of and with the help of groups of Buddhas. These new rituals ensured a metaphysical direct communication with and envisioning of the Buddhas themselves. They could be practiced by lay people and monks alike, alone or in groups. They could be practiced as an individual ritual or incorporated into other meditational rituals. The aim, however, was similar to the one of the fortnightly confession ceremony uposatha, cleansing the physical obstacles of transgressions which hindered the practitioner's way. The ritual texts of confession and repentance consisted of at least 2 parts: lists of Buddha names and confession texts. The recitations of both were accompanied by bodily actions and mental actions, such as circumambulation and visualization practices. In the Chinese Buddhist canons and in the manuscripts, like in Dunhuang, a multitude of confession texts, sutras, and commentaries have been preserved down to the present day. Besides textual evidence, the iconic and aniconic material context of these rituals, carved and inscribed or painted in niches in cave temples, reveals the popularity of this ritual practice. In this following paper, I want to question the written and iconic evidences of rituals of confession and repentance, and juxtapose the Dunhuang findings to those in central and even southern China. And my leading questions, from which I do hope to gather interesting results, are the following. You have it on the slide. Which groups of Buddhas do appear in written and iconic sources? And how are they geographically and diachronically distributed? I focus on, first, groups of Buddhas, the 1,000 Buddhas, large groups. And then I'll go to smaller groups of Buddhas, like the 35 and the 53. Some of you are very well acquainted with these, or with all of them, and their representations and chantings of their names. I first look at the 1,000 Buddhas motif in Dunhuang. That was too quick. In Dunhuang, these motifs come up very often in many caves. We know them on ceilings. And there, oh, sorry. This is a bit difficult for me here to read. Okay. So many come up on ceilings, and we have about 470 caves at Dunhuang, which bear images of the 1,000 Buddhas. 2/3 of these 407 caves bear images of 1,000 Buddhas, and most of them are filling the ceilings of the caves. According to Liang Xiaopeng, who did an extensive study on these 1,000 Buddha motif in Dunhuang, many of the Buddha images bear labels next to them, as you see on the slide from cave 322. And these labels probably were intended for the names of the Buddhas, or possibly also on donors' names. In several cases, the names of the Buddhas are still legible, and according to Liang, they are stemming from Buddha name sutras of confession and repentance. According to Liang, the following caves, he enlisted some, bear such names and are testimonies of the importance and the popularity of such rituals, of these confession rituals, focusing on the 1,000 sutras, on the 1,000 Buddhas. So he enumerated several caves where he could make this connection, a clear connection where you have the names and these names are traced back to a certain confession text. You have here one example, Lei Tang Cave, where you see how this looked like, where this can be imagined, the Buddha name on a label next to an icon. Now I come back to a well-known cave, which you have seen very often already in these few days. It's cave 254. And this cave, I'll show it to you, has, with respect to the 1,000 Buddha motif, received extensive study by Ning Jiang and Hu Dongqing, and they could even establish the text out of which those Buddha names were taken. And you see the 1,000 Buddha motif here for one, for a not very often occurring circumstance, not on the ceiling but on the walls. And here you have it, one in the next to this iconic niche of the Maitreya, and here on the side walls. You have seen that today already. He traced back these names to the Sutra of the 3,000 Buddhas of the 3 eons, the Sanjie, Sanjian, Fo, Ming, Qing. And Ning and Hu, those scholars found that especially 2 texts of these 3 world or 3 period sutra, those of the past and the future, were the source for the Buddha names in this cave. So those 2 texts provided the names of this cave. And interestingly, this was also something found by Liang Xiaopeng. This is the case for nearly all the caves he found in Dunhuang. So the names come, interestingly, all from this Xianjie Tianfo Mingqing. not always from the past or the future, sometimes also for the present aeon of these texts, but they come from this text. So going to cave 17, the so-called library cave, thousands of manuscripts were preserved, amongst which several hundreds were dedicated to Buddha name sutras. Guo Liying found that especially certain sutras, there are several hundred copies. But there are many different texts of Buddha name sutras and confession texts, and I want to highlight some relevant to the 1000 Buddha motif and the smaller motif. So I name 3 of these, or just 3 out of a larger array of manuscripts. This is the one I just mentioned for cave 254. This is the Xianjie Jian Forming Jing. This also appears in the library cave as in manuscript form. So we have it on the ceilings, only the Buddha names out of it, but we have it as a manuscript in the library cave preserved. Interestingly, this is one text version of the Xianjie Jian Forming Jing, Stein 1238. And there you see how such a text was organized, where you have from right to left the Buddha names enlisted in 2 rows with the addressation, the Namor, the incantation in front of each name. Namor Jianbao For, Namor Shema Shema For. And then a text expounding on the sutra or giving a confession text. And all of these had to be chanted. So these Buddha names of these Xianjie Jian Forming Jing was the source of the 1000 Buddha motif in Dunhuang. Inokuchi Taijun, interestingly, who studied the Buddha name sutras, listed only 5 text versions he found in a Stein collection. I think he specifically worked on that. But it's not as you see, not a great number of copies preserved of this text. I stress this because, interestingly, the next text I'm looking at was obviously far more popular, the Forming Jing. This is also a 1000 Buddha name sutra, and it's focusing on 1000 Buddhas in chanting, in confession and repentance rituals, but giving different set of names. It's not the same names as the Xianjie Forming Jing. And these sutra, here you see one example from the Pelliu collection, is also a very nice version from the Pelliu collection when it was lended to Zurich recently. This has stamped Buddhas before every incantation, stamped and painted Buddha icons in front of every incantation. And this is one version without. So we have both from this Forming Jing in the Sutra cave, and possibly a question of money given by the donor if you got an illustrated version or a not illustrated, possibly one reason. However, those Buddha name sutras were large, extensive. They had also confession text Buddha names, had texts which expounded on confession, and also parts from other sutras. So they are rather, the Forming Jing is a large text, very standardized, forming a 1000 Buddha name sutra. Funny enough, there were hundreds of them found in the cave, but no names came of these. They all come, the cave names come from the Xianjie Jian Forming Jing, but not from the Forming Jing. This is just, I want to state this. I'm still thinking about why. What made it popular but not fit for decorating the caves. A third text, which is interesting for me, is the Tijie Forming Jing. And this is a text which is always also present in Dunhuang in the library cave, which has been preserved in several versions. I'm not quite sure how many there are, but this is had nothing to do with 1,000 Buddhas. This is my other interest, the small groups of Buddhas. This is another confession, which is not relying on 1,000, but on small groups, 35 and 53 Buddha groups. They were also chanted, also confessed. It's called the Seven-Limbed Buddha Nama Sutra. Yabuki Keiki, he was the scholar who was talking about this most, and he was the one who linked it to a sect in central China, Hebei Henan region, which used it or wrote it, the three stages sect, and one of their proponents was the monk Xinjiang. This is the text, the famous text which Yabuki Keiki worked on, Stein 59. Where you have several groups of Buddhas, smaller groups of Buddhas, not the 1,000, but a condensation of the 1,000, the 25. You have the 35, the oldest text or confession text there is. This Forschuo Tueding Piniting with 35 Buddhas, and you have the 53 Buddhas taken out of another sutra, the sutra spoken by the Buddha on the contemplation of two bodhisattvas. So these two groups, you have 25, you have several other groups, historical 7 Buddhas, direction Buddhas, which are invoked in this 7-limbed Buddha Nama text. Interesting that you have evidence in Dunhuang of this text, because the Sanjietiao movement was not very long existing, was prosecuted, and the text rather apocryphal, if this is correct. And of course, to my knowledge, there's no visual or material evidence in Dunhuang of smaller groups of Buddha, which is for me interesting because you have lots of, or rather a lot, evidence in central China of these smaller groups of Buddha. And that's what I'm going to look at now. In central China, you of course also have a lot of evidence of the 1,000 Buddha motif. Not very often, it gives you the opportunity to link this 1,000 Buddha motif to confession and repentance rituals. Most of these motifs are more decorative. There are no names, no inscriptions, or any sign that you could closely connect it to confession rituals. But you can, for example, in one case, the famous Fangshan Yunxu, the Lei in Dung, which was opened in 616 by the monk Qingwan. And there, interestingly, you have it on the columns. You have names, you have icons of 1,000 Buddhas, you have the names of the 1,000 Buddhas next to them. And funny enough, it's again from the Xianjie forming Ting, the same text which decorated the Dunhuang walls. And now it comes in another aspect which was fun, or which is interesting for me, that after the 1,000 Buddhas were finished on these columns, at the end of the last column, you had 53, does it mean 5 minutes? Excellent. You have 53 Buddhas below it. So you have the 1,000 and the 53. My point is that in central China, you suddenly receive, without or without the 7 stages sect, you have smaller groups of Buddhas which seem to have been popular because they are displayed in temples. For example, the little cave temple Fenglong-shan, 35 Buddhas in the cave 3, late 6th century. This is probably a site which is related to the 3 stages sect, probably a retreat meditation cave for Ling Yu, the monk, very close to his home temple. We could discuss this later. So this is one of the earliest visual representations of the 35 Buddhas. This is also, I show you only the earliest. This is also the earliest representation, single representation without the other ones, without the other groups. This is 53 Buddhas in Guyangdong. And the funny thing is there you have an inscription saying, I do 53 Buddhas, I do Buddha Maitreya. But you have, if you look closely in Guyangdong, you have it all over. You have all over icons with 53 Buddhas. So this group of Buddha, confession group of Buddhas, was very popular at that time in Lungmen. And this is already my last slide. So I really want to sum up and just say I give you only these 2 examples from central China. There are several more, There are several more. And in central China, this idea of these small groups of Buddha, which are useful for confession, they go over to Sichuan. They linger on until the Ming dynasty. I have evidence of these, especially 2 groups of Buddha, 3553, during the Ming dynasty too. And my last point is, they lingered obviously on and were successful in China until the present day, because this is a textbook from present day practice, from nuns or monks who chant these 88 Buddha names every day during service. And now I have a little, I have to go out just a last second, and I'll go. Now. And this is how it sounds. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Okay. Like everyone else, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizer of the conference and thank you for inviting me here. You cannot hear me. Okay, I have to shout. Does this work now? Yeah? Okay, good. But now I have a little trouble reading my text. Okay. Okay, so thank you again to everybody. A number of Tang Dynasty paper scrolls from the library cave at Mogao contain nothing but repeatedly stamped impressions of Buddha images. Although most examples in the group are dedicated to the Buddha, several are stamped with images of other deities like bodhisattvas and lokapalas, while others feature Buddhist triads, Buddha lands, and seated Buddhas within stupas. These scrolls received relatively little attention from scholars, understandably, because they do not contain any scriptural text. Besides, the repetition of the same stamped images seems less visually appealing than, say, a narrative painting that illustrates the Buddha's life story. As a result, they are left largely unnoticed for a long time since the 1970s and the 1980s, when some major works were done by French and Japanese scholars like Fushieda Akira. This paper intends to carry forward previous scholarship on the subject and make further examination of both the forms and contents of those scrolls to argue for a nuanced interpretation of transference of practice across media with an emphasis on materiality and the interconnected relationship between function and production. Is the mic working? Can you hear me? Okay, great. So one key question to be asked about those seemingly unimportant scrolls is how do we approach and organize the study of materiality of these manuscripts? How to, if at all possible, discern the cultural or ritualistic significance attached to these materials? To answer these questions, we will have to start with close examinations of extant scrolls. It appears that all of those scrolls are filled with repeated impressions of Buddhist images from the very beginning till the very end, without any empty line or empty spot anywhere. Okay, for instance, if you look at the highlighted area in this slide, you will find that this is a very interesting scroll that measures close to 9 meters long, and we suspect that the original form would be much longer than this, and it contains more than 2,000 impressions of the same Buddha images. Those images were individually impressed, one after another, on paper that's thinner than usual. Besides, the stamped images go over seams where 2 pieces of paper were joined, indicating that the sheets were either pasted together to form a scroll and then stamped all over till the space was filled up, or the sheets were added as one moved along with the stamping act. In either case, the intention was to fill all of the available space across the surface. The end result of such a repetitive stamping act is a scroll that heightens the sense of repetition, which points to ritualistic or performative aspect of the object, and a visuality of infinity, which accentuates the sameness of the stamped Buddha images. It's most likely that all of the impressions were not made in one go. Some mistakes found here and there in surviving scrolls indicate that more than one hand was involved in the creation process. If you look at the stamp, say on your right-hand side, which is flipped upside down and overlapped with an accurate one, you will realize that somebody must have picked up the stamp the wrong way and quickly found out that after the first impression that, oops, wrong side, and put another one over it to correct that mistake, and then continued with the rest. If only one person was responsible for the stamping throughout the entire scroll, this kind of mistake wouldn't have happened. Some scholars proposed that these scrolls were related to a ritual known as Yinsha Fo Hui, or literally Buddhist assemblies for sand stamping. Assemblies documented in numerous Dunhuang manuscripts datable to the 8th to the 9th centuries. According to these manuscripts, often titled Yinsha Fo Wen, assemblies were held at the beginning of the Chinese New Year for the stamping of Buddhist images into the sand. They were organized by some kind of She, temporarily set up for the purpose of organization. Such rites were meant to ease calamities, to protect the nation, and to distribute blessings to those in the worlds of the living and the dead. One version of them is One version of them is preserved in the modern edition of the Chinese Buddhist canon and is shown here on the screen. The text takes the form of a prayer. It describes the setup of an altar, the time when the ritual is conducted, and the desired outcome the ritual will bring about. Some other Yinsha Fowen that survived from the library cave tell us that the participants would go out to the wild outdoors and stamp thousands of Buddha images there. The ritual was often preceded by a waterland retreat, a Buddhist ritual that involves feasting all the beings of the cosmos, both Buddhist and non-Buddhist, as well as bestowing food and Buddhist precepts on wandering ghosts. In addition, the Yinsha Fo Hui assemblies were typically followed by a lamp lighting ritual at night. Although it's not mentioned in the text, it is most likely that during the ritual performance of stamping, the prayer would have been recited. It is believed that using sand as the ground for multiplication of Buddha images is meant to invite their disappearance and may be seen to enact the concept of impermanence, which is crucial and fundamental to Buddhist thought. Thus, this ritual described in Yinsha Fowen is somewhat comparable to the group fasting ritual that's still practiced in places like Tibet, which involves stamping on water. I do not have a picture of such practice to show you, but a photographic work produced by the Chinese contemporary artist Song Dong seems to me to be one that's inspired by the Tibetan Buddhist practice. Also, the wood block stamp in the collection of Musée Guimet has been frequently referenced as a material evidence of this kind of practice in Dunhuang. It has a seated Buddha carved in reverse on one side and a handle on the other side. It is notable that there's no mention of use of paper in extant Insha Fuwen, yet scholars like Fujieda Akira believe that these Dunhuang manuscripts of stamped Buddha images were related to the Insha Fuhui assemblies. In his 1979 publication, Fujieda suggested that the character Sha in Insha Fuhui could be an abbreviation of the phrase Heng He Sha Shu, countless as the grains of sand in the Ganges, which was mentioned in the Insha Fuwen and was commonly used in Buddhist literature to stand for countlessness. Thus, the individually stamped, similar-looking Buddha images represent the infinite number of Buddhas coexisting in the Buddhist universe, reflecting the Buddha's unbounded spatial and temporal presence. If what Fujieda said about the Dunhuang scrolls were to be taken as true, then one can almost visualize or reconstruct the process of production as follows. On around the Chinese New Year, a scroll of blank paper was prepared for a group of people to perform the ritual stamping. Each of the participants took turn to make multiple impressions of a Buddhist image. The mistakes discussed earlier in this talk show where people change hands. The theory linking the Dunhuang manuscripts with Insha Fuhui assemblies seems plausible, except that there were a few glitches that one cannot easily ignore and requires further consideration. The physical act of stamping bonds practitioners with the deities, and the impressions left on either paper or sand are tangible evidence of such moments of connection. Interestingly, the stamped scrolls ended up in the library cave, while Buddha images stamped into sand would be washed away by water. So, why stamping on paper instead of sand in the first place, especially when the latter appears to be a more intuitive way to enact the concept of impermanence? After all, paper costs money, whereas sand doesn't. Besides, paper is semi-lasting as an artistic medium, and sand by the riverbank isn't. Considering the fact that those stamped scrolls ended up in the library cave, it seems that paper was chosen for use in this context because they provided material records of the meritorious act of stamping, which were worth preserving and inclusion in the repository of the sacred waste in the library cave. Another glitch in Fujieda's theory has to do with, this manuscript in the Stein collection at the British Museum. Measuring approximately 5 meters long, the scroll is the only one among all that has ink-written notations. These inscriptions appear at an interval of 21 impressions, and they mark the days corresponding to the 6 monthly fasting days, which in return suggests that the practitioner might have made 21 impressions, noted the date, stopped there, and then waited until the next fasting day to continue stamping of the next batch of 21 impressions. During the late Heian and Kamakura periods, Japanese Buddhists integrated the repeated stamping of Buddha images into their daily ritual, first vowing to make a certain number of images and then fulfilling their commitment. The production process we have just come up with for the present scroll seems to be in line with what was practiced in medieval Japan. If that's indeed what was done to our scroll, then it would explain why those impressions would have to be printed on paper as opposed to sand and would have survived in the library cave. These little details and glitches are not insignificant because they alert us to the possibility of overgeneralizing the function or usage of those prints that may look similar but could have been derived from rather different ritual practices. Speaking of rituals, as mentioned earlier, prayers like the In Sha Fo Wen might have been recited as one moves along with the stamping. But what else could have been done or recited during that process? Unfortunately, there's no text out there that gives us a straightforward answer to that question. However, some visual cues provide support for the existence of a connection between the repetitive stamping of Buddha images and the Thousand Buddha motif, which in turn points to the sutras of Buddha names that Professor Rösch just explored a couple of minutes ago. First of all, extant In Sha Fo Wen prayers commonly mention manifesting thousands of the Buddha's true appearance in a number of the grains of the sand in the Ganges. It says, 托千圣之真容，印恒沙之遍迹, which emphasizes on creation of innumerable numbers of Buddha images. Secondly, stamped Buddha images were used similarly on some of the scrolls that transcribed text of Buddha name sutras. Like the one shown on the screen, you can see, if you have very good eyesight, you will see that those Buddha images were actually printed first and then hand-colored later. Moreover, the annotated dates on the British Museum scroll are analogous to the numerical notations on the sutras of the Thousand Buddhas' names of the present worthy Karpa in the Stein and Paleo collections. In both cases, the annotations were handwritten in ink at regular intervals and functioned to mark the passage of time. As demonstrated by Petra and others, these Dunhuang manuscripts of Buddha name sutras were used in such rituals which involved the chanting of Buddha names. Evidence of such liturgical use is provided by the way hand scrolls of these sutras were altered over time. A case in point is Paleo 4639, an 8th century transcription of the sutra of the Thousand Buddhas' names of the present worthy Kalpa. It consists largely of lines of Buddha names written in ink and interspersed with generic images of the Buddha painted in color. Every 100 names, a Chinese numeral was added in subscript to keep track of the total. However, between the names of the Buddha of the Fuda for the Buddha of meritorious blessings and Sui-shi for the Buddha of timelessness, a sheet inscribed with a repentance text was inserted, proof that the scroll was intended for ritual use. What does the connection with the Buddha name sutras tell us about possible usage of those Dunhuang manuscripts with repeated impressions of Buddha images? Is it possible that Buddha names were chanted as the Buddha images were stamped on paper in those In Sha Fo Hui assemblies? I don't know, but it seems to me a possibility that's worth further investigation. So to conclude, although the stamped images do not contain any textual teachings, their making may ironically require more introspection than the production of a woodblock print. What I found fascinating is that the possible explanations for the practice of stamping all relate to the material nature of works. The main difference between the rituals discussed above is that some are predicated on ephemerality, whereas others are less so. Why would stamping for the same ultimate sake of accruing merit end in opposite outcomes? The examples examined today show that the transference of practice across media required a lot of thinking and still demands nuanced interpretation from us, modern scholars, historians of art and religion. So we must continue thinking about these questions, and we should probably think harder than ever before. Thank you.
Okay, that seems to be missing part of my title. I want to echo the thanks of Let's see if we can scoot this over. I want to echo everyone's thanks to the curators for bringing the exhibition together. It's a fantastic show, and I also want to thank the conference organizers for bringing us together today. As the last paper on the last panel, I am well aware that what the audience wants from the last paper on the last panel is that it be short. So I will try especially to stay on time, but I also hope to offer you some cute images along the way, and thank you for your patience. And despite Professor Buswell's kind introduction, it turns out I'm not going to talk about text today. I have to admit that when I've looked at images from Dunhuang, I've always been very attracted to the images of daily life. So that's one motivation for my paper today. The other motivation is that my current research project is on contemporary Buddhist children's literature. And as I've worked on that material, I've begun to pay more attention to how children are presented in pre-modern sources. So this is what prompted my search for children and my thoughts on children in the images from Dunhuang. To begin with, I think it is clear from the papers we have heard both today and yesterday that it's fair to say that many of the Mogao caves are family sites. Caves were often sponsored by a single family. Eugene Wang yesterday referred to them as family shrines. And the importance of the family is clear in the depictions of donors, which often take the form of a husband and wife pair. As such, they may be intended, as some scholars have argued, as a type of ancestor portrait. And the inscriptions speak of children doing their filial duty to repay their parents' kindness. There are also more expansive depictions of donors, and Sarah Fraser yesterday discussed how these portraits demonstrated marriage alliances. Further, Bob Scharf has already flagged them again this morning. So if these are family sites, we might also ask where the children are and how they might fit into ritual activities and the religious imagination at this site. Over the course of the past 2 days, we've talked also about the rituals that animated religious life and informed the visual program of the Mogao caves. Now I want to ask how practitioners came to understand ritual roles and how they were performed. To do so, I wish to expand the scope of our attention from adults to children. I want to note at the outset here that I will be taking an atemporal approach in this paper. I hope that by investigating the appearance of children, especially in the context of ritual, we might begin to understand more about how ritual is conceived and how children fit into the life cycle of religious development in medieval China. So to provide some context for this discussion, I want to start with two images that are actually not from Dunhuang. These are images from the classic of filial piety, images that are attributed to Li Gonglin and dating to the 11th century, held in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The text that these images illustrate dates from the late Han Dynasty and purports to be a dialogue between Confucius and one of his disciples. In both text and images, a clear parallel is drawn between proper comportment within the family and correct behavior towards one's ruler. This particular illustration, if you can see on the lower half of it, accompanies a text describing filial acts. And in particular, the phrase included says that he, the son, nourishes the parents to give them utmost pleasure. So here we see aged parents not only being offered food to eat, but also being entertained by the family below. And I hope it's clear to those of you, who are further back that there are children in this group. So making an offering, of course, is a basic component of most rituals, whether Buddhist or otherwise. This particular group includes 3 children, identifiable by their size, position, and hairstyles, and their inclusion signals how ritual training might take place. That is, they're observing what their parents are doing. Although the text of the scripture of filial piety is aimed at male adults, those charged both with serving their parents and with serving their ruler, this domestic scene shows that filial behavior extends to the entire family. And we know this from other kinds of texts as well. A child learned by observing his or her parents so that he or she might carry out the same actions at a later stage in life. It's worth noting here that the adults in the lower half of this image are also children in relation to their parents. And in fact, in texts, it's difficult to distinguish between an adult child and a child in the chronological sense, like what we think of as a child. The visual sources, I think, make this distinction somewhat more clearly. However, the practice of making servants or other social inferiors smaller can make it less obvious than it might otherwise be. So looking at the second image from the scripture of filial piety, we can see sort of a later development in ritual, of ritual practice, now here in the context of the king or the ruler. Here, the ruler himself offers sacrifices in the ancestral temple, and you can see the officials below. So the format is actually very similar to that of serving one's parents, from the arrangement of people to the fact that this is a food offering. The adults in this scene may have learned the basics of ritual in their family homes, but now participate in rituals of state. This bifurcation between domestic rites and public ritual or state rituals is also one of participation. The former might involve a range of ages and genders, while the latter are intended for adults. Drawing on this distinction, we might ask whether Buddhist rituals were intended for the whole family or whether they were the concern of mature adults. When we look to the visual evidence from the caves to provide answers, we find that one type of image of children sees them not as participants, but as the consequence of effective ritual action. These particular images are illustrations of illustrations are illustrations of the chapter of the Lotus Sutra on Guanyin, showing how the Bodhisattva, in this chapter, showing how the Bodhisattva aids sentient beings in various ways. In this case, the Guanyin has rewarded pious lay believers with children. Here, a young girl accompanying her mother, and a young boy with an adult male. The children's hand gestures, as you can see, mirror those of their parents, and the young boy looks back at his father. This is a companionable family outing, perhaps, but it doesn't tell us much about how these children might have participated in rituals or any sense of their religious life. Illustrations of the scripture of requiting parental kindness and texts of this nature convey children in similar ways and offer similar scenes of domestic harmony. These texts were critical for presenting the argument that children owed a debt to their parents and that Buddhism provided the means to fulfill it. Scriptures such as these have often been read as responses to the criticism that Buddhists fail to be filial enough, and the illustrations show why it is that children owe a debt to their parents. For example, a Northern Song Dynasty silk banner positions depictions of parental kindness around a central image of the Buddha preaching. Here, women bathe infants, they tend infants in their cradles, and they, even when they are going about agricultural tasks, you can see the baby off to the left and they're sort of in the fields, and they carry children on their shoulders. This illustration of a child in a carriage suggests from one of the cave murals is in the same vein. These images offer charming illustrations of family life, but they don't suggest a ritual or educational component to that family life. At best, they gesture towards ritual offerings in how the elders are positioned within the home. Further, the audience for these images is likely to have been adults. By viewing images of what parents do for their children, they are reminded to engage in merit-making activities on behalf of their own parents, who would now then be advanced and aged. The children in these images are too young to be observing their parents, for the most part. Rather, they are passive recipients of adult kindness. Repaying that kindness, on the other hand, was the work of adult children. However, the fact that these images show an infant next to parents planting rice or on the shoulders of a parent strongly suggests that children were frequent companions to adults as they went about various everyday activities. This may have provided them opportunities to witness ritual or other types of religious behavior. Take, for example, the illustration of the magic competition between Rudraksha and Shariputra, the narrative discussed by Nathalie Monet yesterday in Cave 146 from the Five Dynasties. To the left of Rudraksha, there is a group of onlookers, and I've just cut out the detail that I needed. But to the left, this is to the right of Raksha, there's a group of onlookers watching the heretics be converted to Buddhism. Among this group, there are two illustrations of a parent and child riding an ox, and you can see them center right. Below them is a calf nursing at its mother, and above them, an old woman rests in her chair. The mural is full of such vignettes, some of which have been discussed by Sarah Fraser in her book. And these, I think, serve in part to provide a kind of Chinese context to the magic competition. For this group, it seems important that the heretics' conversion be witnessed by a wide group of people. Children are simply one element of this group. A similar impulse may be at work in an early Tang depiction of two stone Buddhist statues crossing a river in Cave 323. This illustrates the miraculous appearance of two stone Buddhas and their relocation to the Tongshan Temple. Stories such as these celebrate Buddhism at Chinese sites and within local landscapes. They further show the religious potency of images and their fabrication. The image of a woman and child here is similar to you could see this it's right at the bottom here, is similar to the ones we have just seen. But here, as you can see in the detail, the woman holds flowers or a branch with her hands clasped in an attitude of reverence, and the child is behind her. The child does not have his own branch, but is surely witnessing the devotion of his parents to this miracle. Both of these cases, however, represent the miracle tale and then the crossing of the river, represent kind of unusual events. Miraculous statues, needless to say, do not make their way across rivers very frequently, and so the pedagogical value of this particular interaction seems limited. Yet instances such as these, whether witnessed or represented, surely informed young children as they developed conceptions of what types of behavior were appropriate in Buddhist contexts. The images I've discussed thus far involve both parents and children and show a kind of pleasant family life embedded in Buddhist settings. There are also many illustrations just of children in the absence of any adults. When juxtaposed with the scenes we have just examined, we can begin to get a sense of how the ritual life or the religious life of children might be shaped. One of the best-known passages of the Lotus Sutra, if it's fair to single out a passage from the Lotus Sutra in this way, speaks of young boys playing at building stupas out of sand, noting that even an act such as this was, quote, enough to achieve the way of the Buddha. The mural of this scripture in Cave 23 reflects this episode. In this passage, the efficacy of building stupas out of sand is both due to the merit in past lives and to the teachings of the Buddha, which matched the level of the audience and thereby facilitated acceptance of the Buddhist teachings. Later in the same passage, an even stronger connection is made between simple or childish efforts and the generation of merit. Quote, and even children at play, if they use grass, wood, or a brush, or even a fingernail to make an image of the Buddha. In this way, such people gradually accumulate merit. Here, partial or imperfect effort is recognized as a worthy approximation of the act. The biographies of many child prodigies, including eminent monks, suggest that playing at ritual was common for certain types of precocious children. For example, in the biography of the Tang Dynasty monk Zhencheng, we read that, quote, in everyday life, when he played, it was in arranging Buddhist statues. And so his father, seeing this as the fruit of the practice of prior lifetimes, sought for him to become a monk, end quote. In another text, or another biography, the monk Xuanchang, before he entered the monastery at age 9, about him it was said that when he played, he gathered sand to make stupas and plucked leaves for incense. Similarly, lines from the biography of Falrong also echo this. Quote, when his father instructed him in holding the brush, he then drew images of the Buddha, and when it came to play with others, he gathered sand to make stupas. Everything that he did was a Buddhist rite. And all those examples are from biographies of 8th and early 9th century monks. So, that one can build stupas out of sand or play in this way conveys, I think, something important about how ritual is conceived. First of all, most of the children are carrying out these acts on their own, without mention of parents or teachers. In the case of Farong, his father instructed him on how to use the brush, but then he spontaneously started to draw the Buddha. So somehow these children have learned what motions to make without necessarily needing the intervention or the presence of adults to engage in such practices. Okay. From this, we might theorize that ritual correctness, at least in terms of physical actions, need not be absolute. A stupa made of sand and the approximation of a ritual by a child are both acceptable. A ritual need not be perfect to be efficacious. How ritual was regarded provides a partial explanation as to why children could act out rituals, but we might also see this as signaling something about children themselves. That is, children have the potentiality to act in ritually efficacious ways even without rigorous training or adult guidance. For the Lotus Sutra, in the passage that I just referred to, spiritual potential in this life was shaped by learning and actions in prior lives. An infant came into the world shaped by past experiences and therefore had ready-made potential to achieve the Buddhist path. The infants and toddlers in the depictions of the Pure Land in the wall paintings of Dunhuang are perhaps the best-known examples of this kind of spiritual potential. The three primary scriptures on the Pure Land do not mention children specifically in the descriptions of rebirth, referring instead to being born, generally sheng. The larger sutra on Amitayas explains that some are born from embryos, taisheng, and some are born through transformation, huasheng. This leads to distinction. So if you want to illustrate what it means to be born from an embryo, it seems to me that one of the choices made is to illustrate this as an infant, even though, of course, human beings at all ages were once embryo-born. Yet by using very young children in this context, it creates a visual connection and an implication that is not necessarily present in the written text. Being born into the Pure Land is to become a child again, you can see center here, and to grow up in an ideal spiritual environment. The benefits of such an environment do not require waiting until a later point of development. But can be enjoyed by anyone because all possess this kind of spiritual potential. We see this potential exhibited actually in the ritual action of those born in the Pure Land. Babies or toddlers bow down to the feet of a bodhisattva. And I think that the illustrator has taken special pleasure in illustrating sort of the fat little baby bottom here. So there are echoes in this image with that of the children creating stupas, I think, especially since it's a group of children, not with any adults around. So in the Pure Land images, the infants are reborn into a pool just below the assembly of the Buddha and his retinue. This creates a separation between the children and the divine beings that is both natural and obvious. The lotus-born children are in the presence of Amitabha, but are not interacting with him in any direct way aside from this kind of bowing. As with human adults, children seem to learn not through co-participation, but through observation and being in the presence of others. Rituals work because they evoke the numinous presence of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, not because they are necessarily perfectly carried out. As I noted earlier, one of the complexities in understanding children within the context of Chinese religious practices and in the visual sources from Dunhuang is that child signals both an age and a developmental phase, as well as a relationship. Children remain children to their parents as adults and have responsibilities therein. Many of a child's responsibilities are carried out primarily when that child has reached adulthood, such as caring for elderly parents and honoring one's deceased parents. Images of chronological children serve a slightly different purpose, I think. They elicit the potentiality of all beings for worship and spiritual growth. Now, based on the images of the young children that we have looked at today, I would offer the initial assessment, thinking back on these series of images, that families, that while they may have been created through the aid of ritual, were not actually the primary site for education about Buddhist rituals. And in fact, that when an artist goes out of his way to depict a child, it seems to be in order to emphasize the innate potential for spiritual practice, made possible in part by the actions of prior lives. This potential, in turn, allows even the semi-ritual action of a young boy with sand to be efficacious and meritorious. Thank you. We have to go back up.
Well, thank you for all your presentations. We can open it up now for discussion. We have about, well, not too much time, about 20 minutes or so. Please.
Thank you very much for the very interesting talks. My question, thank you so much. My question is for Petra about the repentance rites, and I'm wondering, Petra, if you can tell us if these rites involving the names of the Buddha have any relation to the Chanhui that were based on the Golden Light Sutra.
I didn't get it. Sorry.
Oh.
On Golden Light Sutra, what?
If there's connection, or if you can talk to us also about the repentance rites from the Golden Light Sutra. The Jingguan Changfa. I'm just wondering if there's any connection, because these were at the Northern Liang court, they were being conducted.
I must confess, as far as I know, it is not related to those
okay.
confession rituals I was looking at.
Hi, Petra. Enjoy your paper very much. I just wonder, I mean, you've done such a thorough work, and so there might be some deliberation, a point in leaving out the Xiaonanhai site, where the material certainly is part of this big story, but I wonder what, I'm sure you know well, so I just wonder your rationale not discussing the Xiaonanhai material. In Henan,
Yes, I know.
where they have this 35 Buddha kind of, I remember, inscribed on the wall of the Xiaonanhai cave.
Do you mean the Baoshan? Not the Xiaonanhai. I mean, this is, in Xiaonanhai, it's, I think not. There are also
no,
a relation to confession rituals, but not to the 35 or the 53. Well, my point was not to go into too much into the Sanjiejiao argument, because I think the Sanjiejiao with the Jijie Fomingting and the seven-limbed Buddha Nama, this is one kind of ritual. Xinjiang, he combined those small Buddha name texts into one ritual, but he took already existing ritual texts. I think this is so interesting. He took an existing ritual of the 35, the oldest, which exists, and he also took a obviously very common one, the 53 Buddhas, which is also from the Yaoshang Puxia Jing. So he combined existing rituals, but this doesn't say whenever 53 or 35 come up, it's immediately Sanjiejiao. So that's why I a little bit deliberately omitted the Baoshan and gave you an example from Guyangdong, which is much earlier, 511, so it becomes very obvious, nothing to do with Sanjiejiao. And Fenglungshan, I admit, this is supposedly Li Yujin, he suggested that the Fenglungshan cave is to be understood to be, well, the meditation cave or somehow relatable to Lingyu, the master of Xinjiang. So the Fenglungshan possibly is somehow coming close to the Sanjiejiao, but still it's a bit, it still has the 35 and no combination. So this is still giving you the fact that this is a little bit an independent ritual on the 35. That was a little bit my point. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
In the back. There's one back here, one over in the front. Okay, yeah, please.
Do you hear me? It's a question also for Petra. Is there any numerological meaning or cosmological meaning to the 35 and the 53, which is the reverse of 35? So
yeah, please enlighten me. I don't know. I mean, the 88 is an auspicious combination, right? I mean, that's probably why they have been bound together, or that is why it's so enticing, and it was such a successful, popular ritual. But auspiciousness, I don't know. I mean, somebody came up with the numberings system, but I don't know. I haven't found anything convincing or conclusive. Sorry, perhaps 35 and 53 both are 8, and then it's 88. This might be an enticing number game, but frankly, honestly, I haven't heard anything reasonable so far.
There's one in the back, I think. Yes.
Hi, I have a question for Professor Shen. So you might have touched on this already, but it seems to me like the idea of using stamps to create Buddha images would be a really efficient merit-making sort of machine. And the Lotus Sutra, I think it mentions, it instructs people to go out and produce Buddha images to create merit. And what would you say about sort of these stamps being used as just really efficient merit-making tools?
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's I probably didn't make it explicit enough. But that's precisely one of the points I was trying to make. But the key question I was trying to tackle was, why stamping on paper instead of stamping on sand, if there's any relationship between those scrolls and the so-called insha forhui. But you're absolutely right. The stamping act, be it stamping on sand, on paper, I think has largely to do with merit gaining in a very efficient and fast way.
Okay, go ahead. Follow up.
I'm not sure if I'm remembering it incorrectly, but I think in the Lotus Sutra, they mention producing Buddha images so that others can see. And I don't know, but I was thinking maybe that might be related to why they're stamped on paper.
That's possible too. That's right. That's right. That's why I was thinking that very often when we were trying to identify a particular ritual in relation or in association with a extant scroll or a object like those I showed you, we tend to go down the route of feeling we have to choose either A or B. But what I was trying to propose is that we probably need to look at a multitude of possibilities, and what you propose is certainly one of them. But whether or not it has direct connection with the Lotus Sutra, and especially to do with encouraging people to replicate Buddha images, I think is a slightly separate issue, because here I think it has more to do with vast quantity of Buddha images made by a group of people. So it's more to do with like a group activity to do with certain types of fasting ritual. Whereas what's encouraged in the Lotus Sutra and other sutras that have to do with Zaoxiang, image making, I think they have more to do with the making of individual Buddha images that have, carries more sort of facial or bodily features of a Buddha figure.
I have questions for the panels. My wife and I went to Dazhu a few years ago, and we visited, of course, Dazhu, and also a few sites nearby. And in fact, some of them are rarely visited. But anyway, we noticed there's a particular phenomenon. It's so-called 三教合一, 儒教、道教跟这个佛教. And so basically, you can see, for example, 孔夫子的the main his main 弟子颜回 next to 释迦牟尼 and next to 老子. Do we have any evidence of that in Dunhuang at all? Maybe that was developed much later.
I don't know either.
I think we're all looking at each other and nodding our heads no. That at least we don't, I can't think of any. Neither can Shyue-man? No. So that's not to say that there isn't, but none of the people on the stage can recall them.
Yes, thank you very much for a wonderful panel today. My question is for Professor Shen. In all of your studies of these stamped Buddhas on paper, did you find incomplete scrolls?
No. No, not at all. That's the point. But among all the scrolls that I have examined personally, I haven't seen anything that has an empty line or empty spot anywhere. So that's why I thought this is really conspicuous. It's strange. It's unusual. But perhaps you have a point to make or to share with us?
I'm actually wondering about why we find them in the library cave.
Mm-hmm.
Did they have monetary value being complete?
You mean those were like ready-made products that one could just buy at the shop?
Not so much ready-made, but having been completed,
Mm-hmm.
For example, an entire scroll, that they now have value that could then be bartered.
I never thought about it this way, although I did consider the possibility of them being in ready-made products being available at a local shop where one could just go and buy and then use it in a certain ritual to add fasting dates. So I've played with all sorts of possibilities, but this is certainly one that I haven't considered before.
Well, the reason why I'm wondering this is that I am questioning why all of these manuscripts in the library cave. That this is not just a Buddhist treasure house, but a treasure house, period. Somebody's vault worth monetary value at Dunhuang, which was a major trading station.
Yes, I mean, concerning the building and the concealment of the library cave, we have a lot of experts in the room who can tell you more about their views on it. There are many theories as to how we should approach and view the contents and the building of the library cave. What I chose to align my theory with for today's talk is that the library cave was probably a repository of so-called sacred waste. So they did not serve any practical function, but rather they served certain religious purpose, and after which they were too important to be discarded or destroyed, and hence ended up being there in that cave. But this is only one of the many theories out there.
Thank you.
I have a comment for Natasha. Thank you for your very interesting paper. I think the role of children is very often overlooked, so that was a very interesting aspect. As to the first painting by Li Gonglin you have shown, I think maybe I misunderstood you, but I think the way we have to read and look at it, it's two grown-up children who entertain their, or pretend they are children, to entertain and tell their parents that they are, or to make the parents feel that they are still young. I think that's as an act of filial piety. I think that's the way we have to read that scene. Okay. If you look closely, you see the children are grown-ups. Right. And they pretend, they have toys around themselves, but that's to pretend they are still very young and and the parents have the feeling they are still have to care for young children and are young. I think that's probably the act of filial piety that is depicted there.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe in your larger study, Natasha, you address this, but I was wondering, maybe, how should I put this? Do you include, or could you include the representation of the Buddha as an infant? I mean, that seems to me just a screaming sort of example of the ideal infant, you know, and there's lots of representations of the Buddha's, first 7 steps, and then washing the Buddha, in those small panels and everything. And that seems to me is a kind of potential source to theorize about an ideal body type for the Buddha or something. Because it seems you didn't really talk about the body itself of these children. You talked about the fat, chubby cheeks, but that might be an interesting angle. Anyway.
No, I was absolutely aware that those images were there, and I wanted to look at this kind of everyday life of children, and it seemed that in some way the Buddha's life was so exceptional that would open it in different directions.
Right, but I mean, like all of this is an imaginary world, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not real. Well, Paul Ricoeur has a really interesting study on time, and it addresses narrative. And one of the things that he talks about is that any kind of narrative representation has to be believable enough so that to reach the viewer's space or viewer's consciousness, but it also has to be far enough away to sort of be exciting and different. So there's some play there, I mean, these are not illustrations of everyday life. I mean, right? They're not. There is a combination. I mean, there are representations of material culture, but also it's an imaginary religious world that's being depicted, I think.
Yes, but I would still say that the Buddha's life itself is yet again a different kind of category in how it's represented in this space, right? They're not saying that these are, that the Buddha's life is distinct, and that. But I do think that there are echoes in that the Buddha is able to do the, like walk right away, right?
Right. I just mean that the whole sort of project, this idea that any representation of children can somehow reflect 9th and 10th century life, is the premise of that, I think, that's on slightly maybe wobbly ground. But at any rate, why couldn't the Buddha be a kind of interesting ideal foil for an imaginary everyday life?
I actually think the Buddha's life echoes some of the, because obviously when you get into the Pure Land, there's no sense that what's being represented in the Pure Land is real life in any way. And I hope I wasn't trying to say, I was just looking at the way that they were choosing to represent children in these. I mean, I'm not saying that the Pure Land represents real life. And I think there are echoes in the Buddha's life with some of those kinds of scenes. But I did feel that if I were to, that looking at the infancy of the Buddha would open up into a longer kind of paper. So that was intentional on my part.
Victor?
I'd like to take a broader look at this business of stamping, because I think it's related to the rise of printing. Also at Dunhuang, not just do we have these stamps, multiple stamps of the same image on one page or one sheet. We also have many stamped items of the whole image of a Buddha, sometimes with printing on the side or calendars, things like that. There are a lot of things that were stamped, and I think you should bring these in your discussions for the overall development of printing or stamping. But I do want to say that I think stamping, it was happening at the same time that printing was arising. So, as sensational as it is, the world's first printed book, which is in the exhibition, 868, I think that there are prior claims for this rise of printing in the, maybe not of a book, but the printing of, stamping of daranis, charms. In Japan, we have them in the millions. They are actually printed, these things were printed in the millions around this time or even earlier. So people were so excited about the ability to multiply an image. And I think that it has something to do with the notion of accumulating merit through multiplication of something to which you're devoted. So before the invention of printing and stamping in these mass ways, at the end of a lot of colophons of sutras, it says, I did this to accumulate merit, or sometimes we'll have an injunction to copy a text, a given text, many, many times. So and also I just want to close with saying that the rise of stamping and printing is related to the demise of manuscript culture. So it may actually have something to do. People have this theory too, that after printing arose, then this is also a cause for the so-called scrap heap at Dunhuang, the library. The manuscripts culture was obsoleted. It became obsolete. So I don't think we necessarily say they just threw them away as waste, but we're now in the age of emerging print culture.
Right. Will there be time for me to respond?
Yes,
right. Yes, thank you for that question and comment, which is very helpful. And I originally set out to look at this issue within the broader context in which printing played the role, but I decided there's just no room and time for that. But I totally agree that one would have to, when it comes to the time to turn it into a publishable paper, I would definitely like to bring that into the bigger picture. However, I would still like to draw a line between stamping and printing, because if you consider the techniques or the crafts that's involved in the production, they are not exactly the same. Yeah? Here we are looking at a stamp one would hold in hand and to produce duplicates of the same thing. Whereas with printing, you would have the wood block sitting there, and then you place a piece of paper on top of which to take a image out of it, right? So different bodily movements were involved. And also I think by stamping, I think, and also the use of stamp has a longer history than wood printing in China, as some scholars have already suggested. So I think that's certainly something that one would like to look further into, and I'm sure it's going to be a very fruitful research topic. As to the relationship between printed sutras or printed sacred texts and manuscripts, and again, it's not a either-or situation. So even after printing was brought into the picture for the reproduction of the sacred texts, manuscripts never really went out of fashion. And we have got quite a number of archaeological evidence to support that manuscripts continue to flourish, and until very late periods. So I think, but they definitely represent different approach or appreciation of the Buddhist material culture, if I may say so. Yeah.
And I'm afraid we're reaching the end of our time. Natasha mentioned the virtue of a final paper on the final day is that it be short. I think the virtue of the final panel on the final day is that it be interesting to keep everyone awake. So thank you all for succeeding spectacularly at that. That's mine, okay. Oh boy, even more.
There is, excuse me, there is no break now. There's always something else after the final thing. So I have been saddled with the impossible task of delivering a synthesis. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to do that, but let me start by saying a few very general things. I'm certainly not going to go over every paper and tell you what I think about it. That would take too much time. But we have spent the last 2 days, in some very profound sense, celebrating. We have been celebrating a very successful international scholarly collaboration that has not merely brought some new knowledge into the heads of its participants, but concrete, tangible results in a particular very important place in Dunhuang. With other words, the topic of materiality, which is in the title of this conference, has really been justified in the flesh by the key participants. And in this connection, I would like once again to, as I've already done in my printed comments, to express my profound admiration to Director Fan, without whom this would not have been possible. And so, this entire conference has been really a celebration of Director Fan and her extraordinary vision. It has also been a celebration of the extraordinary people at the GCI. Neville, one of them, Martha is somewhere here, I think, and a large number of other people from the Getty who have been traveling to China for almost 30 years now, and I gather are going to continue doing that. And there too, it isn't just knowledge that we have been able to share in this room and yesterday at the Getty, but it is concrete, tangible results that have been produced by the application of cutting-edge modern natural sciences and an extraordinary application of social skills. This could not have been done by most people. So I would also like to express my profound admiration to Neville, to Martha, and to their colleagues. The third person, or the third, the third category of people, but it is in fact one person, with whom I would like, to whom I would like to express my respects today, is the new director, Director Wang, who is here with us and who has shared with us yesterday his extraordinary, very forward-looking vision of how Dunhuang will continue to develop in the times to come. The times are different now from that of his predecessors, and we are looking forward to seeing this collaboration continue and to helping in every possible way to bring about the realization of Professor Wang's vision. So, with these initial bows out of the way, I would like to say to add some personal remarks. I'm very old. I have actually known personally all four directors of the Dunhuang Institute. I'm of course not as old as the institute itself, but when I was a student in Peking in 1980, I was very fortunate to meet Chang Shu-hong, who was then living in retirement in Beijing. He had heard that I had visited Dunhuang and wanted to meet me. And we spent several very interesting afternoons together and attended the performance of a Dunhuang-themed play at the National Theatre in Beijing, Jiji Cao, if I'm not misremembering the title, which well, one of the things that we thought about doing in connection with this exhibition, but haven't been able to do, was to restage this play, which apparently has only been staged this once at the National Theatre back in 1980 and never again. But in any case, so I have encountered Chang Shu-hong. I have encountered his successor, Duan Wenjie, who visited this country and gave lectures in the late 1980s, early 90s. And of course, I met Director Fan in Dunhuang during my visit there, my only visit there, back in 1980. An unforgettable visit, which was so fantastic that I doubt that I will ever want to go back, because it couldn't possibly be as marvelous as what I saw there. This said, and now, of course, we are all here in the presence of the new director, Director Wang, who is, like his predecessors, a very remarkable person, and we have very much enjoyed listening to his remarks yesterday. So, if I said that I am very reluctant to revisit Dunhuang and to create some kind of an overlay over what I remember having seen there 30 years ago, I must say that under the impression of today's conference, I may reconsider, because clearly there has been a great deal of new insight, and so I am in the position of somebody who really is not a Dunhuang specialist at all, and I have greatly profited from what people have presented. I think, like everybody else in this room, we have received a certain view of the field of Dunhuang Xue, or Dunhuang studies, which is multidimensional. One of the dimensions that it has, and which hasn't been much emphasized, but it certainly was palpable to us here at the conference, was that it reposes in diverse roots in different scholarly traditions, or might call them scholarly cultures, and we have seen various manifestations of how these different, the representatives of these different traditions can approach their materials. It is also, of course, and that's perhaps even more salient, interdisciplinary. We have seen a number of different approaches brought to the material, the historical one, the religious one, the philological one, and of course mainly, given that the topic of the conference was materiality, the art historical one, within which in turn we have encountered stylistic, iconographic, and also interpretive approaches. All of them with piecemeal results that build like a mosaic an increasingly comprehensive picture of a very complex reality, which so far still tends to elude us. So, as a way of summarizing, let me add an additional archaeological perspective on this very complex reality, a perspective that was certainly present on the margins of some of the presentations we have heard, but which may deserve a more complete airing. So we would like to, or I think as an archaeologist, one would like to look at a place like Dunhuang first and foremost in its local context as part of a local system. And of course, those of you who know Central Asian studies better than I do probably are aware that the trend in recent decades has been consistently to emphasize North-South relationships and their importance vis-à-vis the East-West relationships. With other words, in the daily lives of the inhabitants of Dunhuang, it is likely that those neighbors who were closest to their daily concerns would have been those in the mountains to the south and in the deserts the deserts to the north, with which they had to come to a kind of arrangement in order to conduct their lives in this forbidding environment. This is true generally, I believe, of the oasis states of Central Asia. And adding this North-South perspectives to their study sort of relativizes the romantic fixation on the so-called Silk routes, which of course were not called that in antiquity, even though perhaps the name is a good one. Perhaps, well, at least from an archaeological perspective, emphasizing the local economy, the local system, as fundamental to the world system of the Silk Route, which was, in a sense, more ephemeral, gives us another perspective for understanding some of the cultural dynamics that have been covered in today's conference. Another thing I think we should perhaps emphasize more than perhaps some of the speakers have done, is that Dunhuang, at least during the period that we know it, was very much a Chinese community, a Chinese community flourishing in a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and religiously diverse environment. It had not always been so, no doubt. It had been incorporated into the Sinosphere only during the Han Dynasty, but by the time these cave temples were constructed, that was certainly the case. And I think if we disregard that, we are liable to misinterpret those elements in the cave temples and in the hidden library that are of diverse origin. Why am I saying that? Well, we are going to get to that. But let me say, first of all, that we might, using a current term from the social sciences, regard the inhabitants of the Dunhuang oasis as a community of practice. A community of practice into which new cultural elements were gradually integrated or inserted in the course of the centuries. With other words, we are dealing with Chinese-style professional groups, not only professional groups, but in general, Chinese-style social entities, lineage, family organization, and also, of course, groups of professional practitioners who dwelled there and who were exposed to various incoming elements and integrated them into their lives. And I think if we keep this in mind, we can probably contextualize more fully what we see both in the texts and in the archaeological and art historical remains. More concretely, when we talk about the differences between cave temples Dunhuang style and the cave temples in other parts of Asia, further to the west, this may be explainable from such a perspective. With other words, the local artisans capable to construct them were used to constructing a certain kind of underground spaces, not, as it happens, cave temples, but tombs, and constructed the cave temples on that model. Now, of course, it would be naive to assume that the local builders wouldn't have been capable of constructing cave temples that corresponded more fully to the model that we see at Kizil and farther afield in Central Asia. So we probably have to add to this scenario the patrons or consumers of the cave temples who presumably wanted that kind of space to inhabit, and with all the religious baggage attached. With other words, I'm very impressed with Robert Scharf's reinterpretation of the cave temples. I think it needs to replace the conventional view, but one might perhaps add to this that by transforming the cultural impetus that led to the construction of any cave temples in Dunhuang at all, to a originally funerary system of underground spaces, it became possible for this type of religious environment to be accepted by this Chinese community of practice in the Dunhuang oasis. The same thing would then also apply to the paintings in the caves, and perhaps one should emphasize here that the painters who painted these caves were probably not specialized in the painting of Buddhist imagery, but they were simply professional groups of painters who painted whatever their their clientele told them to paint, including, of course, the tombs. And I think Robert's illustration from Dingjiajia was perfectly appropriate to illustrate that, even though it is, of course, not of the same period as the cave number 285. But the general argument, I think, is very much valid. I have made it in my undergraduate classes too. I didn't realize that it had such profound Buddhological backing, and I'm delighted to have learned that today. In any case, so to situate newly emerging cultural habits that are linked to the adaptation and acculturation of a new religion within pre-existing social or socio-cultural structures in the community of practice, the Chinese dominated community of practice at Dunhuang, will probably help us understand more clearly what happened. And then once we do that, we can then discuss more fully and more in greater detail whether, for instance, this the internal iconography inside the caves actually basically performs itself independent of any kind of viewership, as has been suggested, or whether it was meant to be viewed in great detail, or maybe whether there are several layers of significance which might be more in tune with contemporary semiotic approaches, but then we can really use the whole panoply of contemporary cutting-edge art historical methodologies to try to resolve these issues. And there may be more than one solution that is that will be valid. In this sense, let me just give you another example. We can also perhaps look at scriptural relics. We can study the arrival of the script into a formerly unscripted place. It is sometimes overlooked that, well, yes, indeed, there were languages in this area that were different from Chinese before the members of the Han nationality moved in here in the Han Dynasty, but the Chinese script is the first one to have reached this Eastern Central Asia, and it retained some of the cultural baggage that it possessed in its original state, going back right to the Shang and to the Zhou, including, of course, the magical religious dimension, which was so greatly emphasized in, for instance, the talismans that have been discussed, but also in some of the texts that we have read and their ritual usages. So here too, I think we can see the adaptation of pre-existing approaches to the medium that were already present in the Chinese communities of practice as when Buddhism gradually came in from the East and was gradually adopted. With other words, I would encourage taking a gradualistic, highly localized approach that takes into account patterns that apply, of course, cross-culturally. And then I look forward to a future in which, based on the kinds of detailed studies, such as we have seen in these 2 days, but others as well, truly cross-cultural comparison will be possible, and that will then enable us to judge more fully to what extent the realities of Dunhuang are unique to this particular situation, or whether they are representative for communities of practice in borderline situations all over the world. I think the idea of having this kind of sophisticated social science informed approach to the data of the humanities is very much compatible with the vision of the Dunhuang Institute as it has developed over its more than 70 years of history. And I am very excited when I think of the future developments that will no doubt take place on the roots of what we have experienced in these 2 days. As my late teacher, Casey Zhang, always used to say, the future looks very bright. Thank you all.
All of you who've participated in the symposium, on behalf of my colleague Marcia Reed and also Mimi Gates and Director Fan, the 4 curators of the exhibition, thank you so much, UCLA for hosting today, and Lothar for making it happen, and all of the various departments enumerated who've participated in this event today. I think it's been wonderful. But I really want, before saying goodbye to you and hoping we meet again, I wanted you to join me in thanking quite a number of people who've gone relatively unacknowledged so far. These are people who've actually made this happen, including somebody who was walking around like this. But she's not here now, she's resting. And that's Jennifer De La Fuente, who works for Marcia, and she's been an organizational driving force that has smoothed all of our problems. But apart from Jennifer, Julia Grimes already, where's Julia? Maybe she's here? Julia, thank you so much. And Ida Hatigu, she's got the most unpronounceable name, Vincent Martins, Sue Kang, Michelle Fahmy, and John Kiff, who did the videography. From UCLA, Jennifer Jung Kim, Elizabeth Lester, and Aaron Miller. So we really owe a debt of gratitude to them and to our colleagues here who've managed the podium so effectively. The last person I should mention is the one who's been doing a quiet translation for Director Fan and that's Peter Barker. There he is, right at the back. And finally, we're finishing now, but once again, thank you very much, Victor, for your excellent launch of the symposium on Thursday evening. So thank you for attending. Thank you again, Lothar. Thank you, UCLA.